The judge's voice sounded like it was coming through the bottom of a tin bucket, flat and procedural, reading numbers and property descriptions into a microphone that made everything sound equally worthless. I sat in a wooden chair that was slightly too small for the room and listened to 31 years of my life get divided into columns on a legal document. My name is Nora Celestine Thibodeau. I am 56 years old. I spent 22 years teaching high school English in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia. And in all that time I taught my students that words have weight, that language carries meaning, that what you say and how you say it reveals who you are down to the bone. I believed every word of it. And then my husband's attorney slid a settlement agreement across a conference table and used the word equitable 11 times in 4 paragraphs. And I understood for the first time that language can also be a tool for taking things from people while making them feel grateful for what little remains. Marcus kept the house in Decatur, the investment accounts, the retirement portfolio we had built together over 3 decades, the lake cabin in the North Georgia mountains that we had talked about retiring to, the one with the screened porch and the dock that needed fixing every spring. He kept all of it. What I kept was a 10-year-old Chevy Silverado with a transmission that hesitated on hills, a storage unit full of the furniture he did not want, a jewelry box that had belonged to my mother, and the deed to my grandmother Celestine's bait shop and small marina on the Tallowa River in the piney flatlands of southeast Georgia. Marcus's attorney, a man named Greer who wore his confidence like a garment he had tailored specifically to intimidate, had noted during the proceedings that the Tallowa River property had been assessed at $11,000, and that Marcus was prepared to let me have it without contest. Generous, I remember thinking. The word tasted like a bad piece of fruit. I had not been to the Tallowa River property in 14 years. Celestine had died when I was 42, and I had driven down for the funeral, spent 4 days sorting through her belongings, locked the door on the bait shop, and driven back to my life in Decatur, to Marcus and his plans and his opinions about what mattered and what did not. He had called the property a money pit, said the taxes were not worth paying on a building that sat unused in a flood zone. I had let the county send notices for years, paying the minimum to keep the land in my name, never going back, never making a decision about it, because making decisions without Marcus had felt, for most of my adult life, like speaking a language I had never quite been taught. Standing in the parking lot of the Fulton County Courthouse with a cardboard box of personal items and a set of keys, I looked at the deed and read the address. 14 Route 7, Tallowa County, Celestine Thibodeau, Bait and Tackle, Est 1962. The drive south took 4.5 hours. Atlanta gave way to the suburbs gave way to small towns, the small towns gave way to long stretches of 2-lane road, lined with longleaf pine and palmetto scrub. The light changed as I drove south, losing its hard urban quality, and becoming something softer and more diffuse, filtered through the canopy, landing on the road in shifting patterns. I had not driven this road since I was a different person. I cracked the window and let the air come in, warm and green-smelling, carrying the particular scent of the coastal plain, river water and pine resin and rich dark soil. I had forgotten this smell. Or maybe I had stopped letting myself remember it. Celestine had raised me for 6 years when my mother was sick. I had lived above the bait shop from age 8 to age 14, sleeping in the small room that looked out over the river, waking to the sound of water and the smell of coffee and the familiar banging of my grandmother moving through the shop below. She had taught me to tie fishing rigs and clean a catch and read the river the way other people read maps, by knowing where the deep water ran and where the shallows hid, and what the surface told you about what was underneath. Marcus had found this charming when we were young. Later, he found it provincial. Route 7 took me off the state road and through the small community of Tallowa Crossing, past the filling station and the grocery and the White Frame Baptist Church. And then out along the river road where the pines pressed close on both sides and the pavement narrowed to the width of a generous suggestion. And then the road curved, and there it was. Celestine's bait shop sat at the edge of the Tallowa River on a concrete foundation that had been pouring itself deeper into the dark Georgia soil for 6 decades. It was a long, low building with a tin roof and a wide covered porch that ran the full length of the front, facing the river. Weathered wood, gray from decades of sun and rain, a hand-painted sign above the door, Celestine's, in letters that had faded to whispers. Behind the main building, a dock extended into the river, its planks warped and silver with age, 6 boat slips all empty, a small storage shed at the end of the dock with its door hanging open, The river beyond was dark and steady, moving south the way it always had, the color of strong tea, reflecting the sky. I sat in the truck for a long moment before getting out. The building was still standing. I had half expected it to have fallen in on itself, the way things do when no one tends them. But it was standing, solid and quiet and somehow, impossibly, waiting. The key ring I had taken from the courthouse folder had 4 keys. The second one opened the front door of the shop after some persuasion, the lock grinding before it turned. Inside, the air was still and heavy and warm, the particular stillness of a space that has been sealed for a long time. Late afternoon light came through 2 windows, cutting pale rectangles across the wooden floor. A long counter ran along the back wall, glass-topped, still displaying trays of fishing lures and hooks that Celestine had arranged there 14 years ago. Behind the counter, pegboard held tools and equipment, each piece in its designated place, hooks outlined in red marker so you would always know if something was missing. On the counter beside the old mechanical cash register, exactly where Celestine had always left it, sat a coffee can full of pens and pencils. And beside that, open to a half-completed entry, was her ledger book. I walked behind the counter and put my hand on it. The ledger was a standard accounting book, the kind with green ruled columns, and Celestine had used it in a way that no accounting teacher would have recognized. It was not a record of sales or inventory, though those things were occasionally mentioned. It was something else entirely, something I was not going to understand fully, until I had read it from beginning to end, on the floor of the shop, in the failing light of that first evening. But first, I had to find the hidden space behind the counter. My hand, running along the wooden panel below the cash register, found a seam that was not a crack. Straight, deliberate, fitted. I had not been looking for it. My fingers found it the way they find familiar things, by memory older than conscious thought. I knelt down and pulled. The panel came away in my hands, revealing a shallow recess in the wall, and inside the recess, 3 things. A metal cash box, the old-fashioned kind with a key lock. A bundle of letters tied with a piece of faded ribbon that had once been blue. And a manila envelope with my name written on the front, in my grandmother's large, looping hand. Nora. Just that, in the handwriting I had read on birthday cards and report card letters and grocery lists my whole childhood. I sat down on the floor behind the counter, and I started reading. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I want to see how far a woman's voice can truly reach. Help me build this community so we can keep bringing these real and powerful stories to you. Celestine's ledger began in 1971, when she was 38 years old, and had been running the bait shop alone for 9 years, since my grandfather Remy died of a stroke in the back room. The early entries were spare, factual. Sold 6 dozen shiners, rented 2 boats, fixed the Coleman lantern for Mr. Arcano, no charge, his wife is in the hospital. That last note was the key to everything. No charge, his wife is in the hospital. The entries continued, over decades, page after page of Celestine's large looping handwriting, recording the ordinary commerce of a bait shop on the Tallowa River. But between the transactions, woven through them like thread through cloth, were the other entries, the real ones. Lent Delia Prater $40 for her electricity bill. Her boy is 2 years old, and it is August. Told her to pay when she can. Fixed the Magnuson family's outboard motor for free. They come to the river to fish, because it is the only thing that still works for them since the mill closed. Charge them for the gasoline and nothing else. Sent $50 to the Okafor family anonymously through the church. Their oldest daughter needs school clothes, and Teresa was too proud to ask anyone. I slipped it into the offering envelope, with their name on it. They will think it came from the congregation. I sat on that floor and read for 2 hours. By the time the light through the windows had gone from gold to gray, I had covered 30 years of Celestine's quiet, unannounced, systematic generosity to the families of Tallowa County. She had never told me, not once. She had talked about the neighbors, the river people, the families who came to the shop, but she had never once said, I helped them. She had never said, I gave. She had spoken of these people, the way you speak of people who are simply part of your landscape, who belong to the same world you belong to, whose welfare is as naturally your concern as the weather. I kept reading. The entries from the 1990s recorded harder times for the shop itself. The big sporting goods chains were moving into the region, and fewer people were stopping at small river shops. The gasoline sales dropped. The boat rentals slowed. But Celestine kept helping. The amounts got smaller, but the frequency increased, as if she were compensating for having less by being more creative about how she gave it. Bartered an afternoon of work on Roy Simmons's dock for 2 weeks of groceries for the Beaumont family. Roy doesn't know what the groceries were for. He thinks he got a good deal on dock labor. He did. But so did the Beaumonts. I pressed my hand against my mouth. That was Celestine. That was exactly Celestine. Then I found an entry from 8 years before she died, and my own name appeared. Nora called on Sunday. Long call. She is unhappy, but she does not know how to say it. Talks around things. I taught her that, God help me. Her father was the same way. She says Marcus is good to her. She says the teaching is fine. She says everything is fine, in the particular way that means nothing is fine. I wanted to tell her to come home. I wanted to say, Nora, the river is here, and the shop is here, and your room above the water is here, and none of it has gone anywhere. But she has built something up there in Atlanta, and I do not know if I have the right to pull at it. I will leave her the shop. She will understand it when she needs to. I read that entry 4 times. She had known, the way grandmothers know, through some faculty that has nothing to do with information, and everything to do with love paying very close attention. Inside were $312 in small bills, a set of brass keys I did not recognize, and a folded document that turned out to be the original deed to the property going back to 1947, when Celestine's parents had bought this piece of riverland and built the first small structure on it. The bundle of letters I saved for last, because I could feel their weight. There were 11 of them, all addressed to Celestine, all written on different papers in different handwritings. Some were on notepad paper. One was on the back of a grocery receipt. One was on what looked like a page torn from a school composition book. A woman named Gracie who said Celestine had kept her family in their home during the winter of 1983 when her husband was in the hospital and the mortgage company was calling. She had never fully understood where the money came from, but she had suspected. She wanted Celestine to know it had saved them. All of them, every single one. A man named Hector who said the loan of $200 in 1991 had allowed him to buy the tools to start his own small repair business, and that business had put 3 children through school, and he thought about Celestine every single day. A teenage girl, her handwriting young and uneven, who said the bag of school supplies that had appeared on her family's porch in September had made it possible for her to go back to school, after her mother thought she would have to keep her home to help with the younger ones. I read every letter on the floor of my grandmother's bait shop as the Georgia evening came down outside, and the river went black, and the tree frogs started their enormous chorus, and the first stars appeared above the dark canopy of pine. Then I found the envelope with my name on it. I had been saving it the way you save the last of something good. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out 3 sheets of yellow legal paper folded in thirds. My Nora, it began. If you found this, you came back. I always believed you would. Not in the way of wishful thinking, but in the way of knowing you, which I do, better than you know yourself in some ways. The ways that a grandmother knows the child, who slept under her roof, and ate at her table, and sat beside her on this porch, and watched the river move. I want to tell you about this place, not what it is. You can see what it is. I want to tell you what it has been. This shop has never made a great deal of money. Some years it made enough, and some years it made less than enough, and a few years it made nothing, and I paid the taxes out of what I had put aside. But it has made something more valuable than money, which is a reason to stay, and a reason to be known, and a reason to be needed. The people who came to this shop came for bait and gas and boat parts, but they stayed because the door was open, and the coffee was on, and someone behind the counter knew their names and their people, and was not going to look away when they were struggling. I have tried to do for this valley what your grandfather Remy taught me you do for a place you love. You show up, you pay attention, you help when you can, and you keep your mouth shut about it, because helping that announces itself is helping that is really for the helper, not the helped. You will find records. I kept records because I am a thorough woman, and because I wanted someone to know, eventually, what this place was for, even if that someone took a long time to arrive. The shop is yours, not because it is worth money, though I believe it has more in it than it appears, but because you are the only person in my life who listened to the Reverend the way I did. You are the only person who knows what quiet means. You have been living somewhere very loud for a very long time. I think you forgot what quiet sounds like. Come and remember. There is something else I need to tell you. Hidden inside the storage shed at the end of the dock, under the second plank from the left wall, you will find a tin box. Do not open it until you are ready. I love you more than you have ever fully known. I tried to show you by teaching you things that would last, how to read the water, how to wait, how to be patient with people even when they exhaust you, because what exhausts you is usually not who they are, but what they are carrying. Your grandmother, Celestine Josephine Thibodeau. I held the letter against my chest and looked at the ceiling. The tree frogs were very loud. I did not cry that first night. The crying came later, and in waves and at unexpected moments, the way grief does when it has been kept in a box for longer than was good for it. That first night I simply sat with the letter and the ledger, and the quiet of the shop, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt exactly where I was. I slept that first night on the old sofa in the back storage room, covered with a blanket I found folded on a shelf. The sofa smelled like cedar and age and faintly, unmistakably, like Celestine's particular brand of hand lotion, the kind in the blue jar she had kept on the counter by the register. I woke to birds and to the sound of the river, which is not like the sound of moving water in a fountain or a stream. The Taloa sounds like a very old conversation, low and continuous and unconcerned with your schedule. I found instant coffee in a cabinet, and heated water on the small propane burner Celestine had kept in the back room for exactly this kind of necessity. I made myself the worst coffee I had tasted in years, and drank it standing on the porch in the early morning, watching the river. The dock needed work. Several planks were punky with rot. The storage shed at the end was leaning slightly to the left, which the water had decided was the correct direction. 3 of the 6 boat slips were in reasonable shape. The other 3 had lost their bumpers to time. The main building needed the roof checked, the windows resealed, and whatever had made a home inside the south wall removed and the damage repaired. The floor of the shop itself was solid, the kind of old heart pine that was nearly indestructible if it was kept dry, and it had been kept dry. Celestine was a thorough woman. She had built things to last. I walked the property slowly, carrying my coffee, taking inventory the way I used to teach my students to read a text, looking not for what you expected to find, but for what was actually there. What was actually there was a great deal of potential, and a very large amount of work. And I had approximately $312, a pickup truck with a hesitant transmission, and whatever the $312 could turn into. I was standing at the end of the dock, looking at the river, when I heard tires on the gravel. A truck had pulled into the lot, an old GMC dark green, engine idling with the sound of something well-maintained but old. A woman climbed out. She was perhaps 75, compact and straight-backed, with white hair in a braid, and the particular unhurried gait of someone who has lived in the same landscape for decades, and does not feel any urgency about it. She stood beside her truck, and looked at the shop, and then she looked down the dock at me, and her face went through several expressions, in quick succession, ending at something that was simultaneously surprised and unsurprised, the expression of someone who has been expecting something, and is still caught off guard when it arrives. She walked to the end of the dock without hesitation, her boots solid on the old wood, and stood beside me, looking at the river. "You are Celestine's girl," she said. Her granddaughter. Same thing, she put out a hand. "Vera Fontenot, I live in the second house past the bridge, have for 40 years. Nora Thibodeau, I know who you are. Celestine talked about you." She looked at the river. "You haven't been back in a while." 14 years, Vera nodded. She did not offer sympathy or ask questions. She looked at the dock, then at the shop, then at me, with the assessing gaze of someone who has seen a lot of things start, and a lot of things end, and knows the difference between the two. "I'll put coffee on," I said. "I brought my own," she said. "Celestine's was always terrible." She pulled a thermos from her truck and 2 tin cups, and we sat on the porch in the chairs that Celestine had kept there for exactly this purpose, and Vera poured, and we drank, and the river moved in front of us. "Tell me about her," I said. "Tell me the things she didn't tell me herself." Vera was quiet for a moment. She turned her cup in her hands. The morning light was warming, working its way through the canopy. "Your grandmother was a woman who believed in invisible work," Vera said finally. "Not invisible because it was secret, though she kept it that way. Invisible because she thought that the moment you started talking about helping people, you had turned it into something that was about you, and not about them." I found the ledger. Vera looked at me sideways. "Did you?" Everything she ever did. Written down, every loan, every repair, every bag of groceries. Vera shook her head. but she was almost smiling. 30 years I was her neighbor, and I only caught her once. She was leaving a box of baby things on the porch of a family 3 miles down the river road. Young couple, first baby, barely making it. I drove past at 6 in the morning, and there was Celestine in her truck, setting a cardboard box on their porch so quiet, she might have been a ghost. What did she say when you saw her? She said she was taking the long way on her morning drive, and she was going to pretend I hadn't seen a thing, and would I like to come for coffee? Vera smiled. I said yes. That was the first time I had coffee at Celestine's. It was terrible then too. It was the same surprise it always is. Laughter when you are not expecting it. When the weight of everything has made laughter seem like something from another country. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, not angry, genuinely wondering. Vera looked at the river. Because she didn't want you to feel like you had missed something you should have been here for. Because she knew you were living your life. Because Celestine was the kind of woman who understood that people have to find their way to things in their own time. She paused. And because she knew you would come back eventually, and she wanted you to find it yourself. She told me once that the best lessons are the ones that arrive when you are ready for them. We sat in the quiet that followed. A great blue heron appeared at the edge of the far bank, standing absolutely still in the shallows, its patience magnificent and complete. I'm not going to sell it, I said. I had not said this to anyone yet. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that it had only been possible in my own mind. Vera looked at me. No, she said. You're not. She left mid-morning, with a promise to return the following day with something for the south wall, which she said she had been watching lean for 3 years, and which she knew how to fix. Ruth said she would bring her nephew, who was good with roofing, and currently between jobs. I spent the rest of the day cleaning, swept the shop floor, scrubbed the counter, cleaned the glass display cases, washed the windows with a mixture of vinegar and water I found under the sink. I unstacked the bait tanks, those long shallow containers that had once held shiners and crawdads, and cleaned them out. I sorted through the pegboard behind the counter, testing each piece of equipment, separating what still worked from what was beyond repair. In the early afternoon, a woman I did not recognize pulled up in a burgundy minivan and carried a covered dish to the porch. She set it on the chair, knocked on the door frame and said, "Welcome back, Celestine's granddaughter," and was back in her van and pulling out before I had fully processed what had happened. A pot of red beans and rice. By evening, 3 other people had stopped. An older man left a bucket of fresh-caught catfish on the dock. A couple brought a box of cleaning supplies, with a note that said the shop's windows had needed washing for years, and they were glad someone was finally there to wash them. A teenage boy arrived on a bicycle carrying a watermelon he held out without a word, nodded when I said thank you, and rode away. Each offering was its own small sentence, in a language I was only beginning to understand. Your grandmother helped us. We're glad you've come. I need to stop here and say something to you, because it matters to me that you know it. The way a community holds the memory of a good person, the way that goodness ripples out through years and comes back as red beans and rice and buckets of catfish and a watermelon on a bicycle, that is not a small thing. That is everything. If you feel what I'm telling you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. And tell me, from which city are you watching? I want to know how far a woman's voice can carry when she is telling the truth. Help me build something here, the way Celestine built something on the Taloa River. The tin box under the second plank in the storage shed took me until the 3rd day to remember. I had been so absorbed in the cleaning and the repairing and the slow return of neighbors with dishes and materials and quiet offers of help that I had nearly forgotten Celestine's last instruction: do not open it until you are ready. I stood at the end of the dock in the late afternoon with a pry bar and worked the plank up from the dock boards. It came up with the particular resistance of old wood that has been in one position for a long time and does not see why that needs to change. The tin box was there, military green, the kind that was made to last, with a waterproof seal and a simple clasp. I carried it to the porch and sat in Celestine's chair. Inside the tin box were 2 things. The first was a savings account passbook from Taloa County Savings and Loan, dated from 1989, in the name of Celestine J. Thibodeau. I opened it. The account had not been touched in 14 years. The balance recorded was $47,312. I stared at that number for a long time. Celestine, who had lived above a bait shop, who had driven a truck with 200,000 miles on it, who had worn the same 4 flannel shirts for a decade, who I had believed was barely getting by, had quietly saved $47,000 while simultaneously giving away everything she could spare to the people around her. The second thing in the tin box was a letter, on yellow legal paper, in Celestine's hand, but different from the letter in the envelope, shorter, more direct. Nora, this money is not for remembering me, it is for doing what needs doing. You will know what needs doing when you get there. I have watched this river for 60 years and I know one thing for certain. The Taloa gives back what you put into it, not in the same form, not on your schedule, but it gives back. You are your mother's daughter and my granddaughter, and Remy's blood, and you are going to be exactly fine. Better than fine. Now go fix the dock. It has needed it for 3 years and my knees weren't what they used to be. Love, Celestine. I sat on that porch and held that letter and looked at the river, and the $47,000 felt less like money and more like a permission slip. Like Celestine, reaching across 14 years and across death itself and saying, you have what you need. Now go. I called the county savings and loan the next morning. The account was still active, dormant but not closed, and transferring it to my name required the death certificate, the will, and a notarized form that the woman on the phone said she could have ready in 3 days. I had all of it in my car. I had grabbed every document from the courthouse folder without knowing what I was grabbing. The instinct of a woman who had spent 30 years being careful with paperwork because someone in her house had not been. 3 days later, I sat across from a bank officer named Ms. Arcano, and she looked at my documents and looked at the account and looked at me with an expression of quiet recognition. You're Celestine's granddaughter, she said. Yes. Your grandmother came in here every year for 26 years, always paid her taxes the same week she deposited. Ms. Arcano folded her hands. She was one of the most consistent customers this branch ever had. Always exact change. Always knew her balance down to the dollar. That sounds right. She told me once, about 4 years before she passed, that she was saving for something. I asked what. She said she wasn't sure yet, but she'd know it when the time came. Ms. Arcano slid the transfer paperwork across the desk. I think maybe the time came. The account transferred into my name by the end of the week. I did not spend $1 of it immediately. I sat with it for several days, the way you sit with a responsibility that is too large to approach carelessly. I made lists, priorities. Things that would make the shop viable, things that could wait, things that were urgent, and things that were not. The dock first. 3 of the 6 slips needed full board replacement. The shed at the end needed leveling and resecuring to the dock frame. The gas dock, the small floating platform where boats could pull up to fill their tanks, was intact, but the fuel line from the shore tank needed inspection. Then the shop roof. 2 sections were showing wear, and one was actively concerning, in the way that roofs become concerning, which is to say, water had found a way in and was currently having opinions about the ceiling. Then the boat rental operation. Celestine had kept 4 aluminum rental boats in the slips when she was running. 3 were still in the covered storage behind the dock shed, upside down on sawhorses, covered with tarps. When I pulled the tarps off, I found the boats in better shape than I had any right to expect. Old, but sound. In need of cleaning, fresh paint on the bottoms, new seat cushions, and motors that were another question entirely. I was examining the motors, 2 old Evinrudes, and a Mercury that had seen its best years somewhere in the mid-1990s, when I heard a vehicle turning off the river road. A white pickup truck pulled in, older model, clean despite its age. A young woman climbed out. She was perhaps 25, with natural hair pulled back from her face, and the kind of unhurried way of moving that either means you are very comfortable or very tired, and in her case I could not immediately tell which. She stood beside her truck and looked at the shop. Then she looked at the dock. Then she looked at me standing beside the boat shed, with a tarp in my hands. She walked over without hesitation. I heard someone was here, she said. Celestine's granddaughter. That's me. My name is Lydia Marchand. She looked at the motors. You've got a bad carburetor on that Mercury, and the lower unit seals are probably shot on the smaller Evinrude. The bigger one might be okay if the fuel lines aren't cracked. I stared at her. How do you know that? My father had the same setup for years. I grew up working on them. She looked at me steadily. I'm good with small engines and I'm good with boats. I'm looking for work. I looked at her and then at the 3 motors, and then at the dock that needed rebuilding, and then at the shop that needed everything. And I made a decision the same way I was learning to make all decisions at this new phase of my life, quickly and based on what I could actually see. "Can you come back tomorrow morning?" I said. 7 o'clock, I'll have coffee on. "What kind of work?" "Whatever kind needs doing." She looked at me for a moment. "I'll be here at 6:30, she said. She was. Her name was Lydia Beaumont Marchand, though she went by her mother's maiden name, and she had grown up in Tallowa County, daughter of a boat mechanic and a school teacher, raised on the river the way I had been raised on the river, in the particular fluency of people who know that water is not a backdrop, but a participant. She had been working at a marina 2 counties north for 3 years before it had been sold to a developer, who converted the property to a waterfront event venue, which was the kind of thing that sounded profitable in a real estate meeting and was a tragedy to everyone who actually used the river. She showed up at 6:30 with tools of her own in a canvas bag, wore clothes appropriate for actual work, and started without waiting to be told what to start. I watched her from the shop doorway. She pulled the cover off the Mercury, checked the plugs, looked at the carb, looked at the fuel lines, and made a list on a small notebook she kept in her shirt pocket. No wasted motion. Just assessment and action, which was exactly what I needed, and also, I was beginning to realize, exactly what I had forgotten was possible. Vera arrived at 8 with her nephew, a quiet man named Sullivan, who was 30-something and spoke mostly in the form of decisive nods. He looked at the south wall, walked around the building once, climbed a ladder to look at the roof, climbed back down, and said, 3 days. He was done in 2.5. Hank showed up that same week with lumber and strong opinions about the dock. Not Hank from any other story. My Hank. Henry Doucette, who had been Celestine's closest friend for 40 years, and had driven past the shop every day since she died, and had been waiting, in his patient riverman way, for someone to come back and turn the lights on. He was 71 years old, wide-shouldered, slow-moving, with the methodical patience of someone who had spent a lifetime working with materials that did not hurry. He showed up one morning with his truck loaded with pressure-treated pine and a cooler with 2 kinds of iced tea. "I heard you were here," he said. "Vera told you." "Vera tells everything eventually." He looked at the dock. "That wood's been needing replacement for 4 years. Celestine couldn't get up there on her knees, and I kept telling her I'd get to it." He picked up a board. "I'm getting to it." "I didn't ask you to do this." "I know. I'm not doing it because you asked." He walked to the dock. "Celestine helped me finish building my house in 1987. Showed up one Saturday morning with a crew of 3 people she'd apparently told to come without consulting me, and they stayed for 2 weekends until the framing was done. I never properly repaid that." "She wouldn't have wanted you to." "No," he said. "She wouldn't, but she's not here to stop me." He almost smiled when he said it. Lydia in the boat shed or on the dock, or on her back under a motor, with tools spread around her, in the organized way of someone who knows exactly where everything is. Sullivan and his careful, efficient work on the building. Henry on the dock, replacing boards with the unhurried certainty of a man who has laid boards before, and knows that doing it right takes the time it takes, and not a minute less. Vera, who appeared most mornings with food and strong opinions, and a store of knowledge about Celestine's history that I was drawing on like water from a well. And me, behind the counter, cleaning and organizing and reading Celestine's ledger from the beginning to the end for the 2nd time, understanding it differently now that I understood the context. The bait shop had never been just a bait shop. It had been a hub, a waypoint, a place where the river people of Tallowa County could stop and know that someone was behind the counter who knew their name and would not look away. I was beginning to understand what that meant. And I was beginning to understand, in the slow accumulating way of things that are too important to arrive all at once, what it was going to mean for me. The phone call from Marcus's attorney came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after I had arrived at the Tallowa River. I was on the dock with Henry, watching Lydia test one of the Evinrudes in a barrel of water, listening to it run and not run, while she diagnosed and adjusted and re-diagnosed. I had my grandmother's ledger on my knee, open to the 1990s entries, and I was doing what I had been doing most mornings, which was simply learning who Celestine had been. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The attorney was Greer's associate, a younger man whose voice had the practiced smoothness of someone trained to deliver difficult news as if it were merely administrative. He said Marcus was filing a motion to challenge the property division in the divorce settlement. He said new information had come to light regarding the value of the Taloa River property. He said specifically that a state-funded environmental and heritage corridor project was under consideration for the Taloa River Basin, which, if approved, would significantly increase property values along the entire river road. He said Marcus was prepared to request that the settlement be reopened and the property value reassessed, and that Marcus's share of the increased equity be awarded accordingly. He spoke for 4 minutes in language designed to make injustice sound procedurally inevitable. When he finished, I said, "I'll be in touch," and ended the call. I sat on the dock for a few minutes. Henry was watching me, without appearing to watch me, the way old river people watch things, sideways and continuous. Lydia cut the motor, and the silence came back. "You okay?" she said. "My ex-husband's attorney wants the property." Henry set down his hammer. Lydia wiped her hands on a rag. "What kind of claim?" "They're saying the property is worth more than it was assessed during the divorce. Apparently there's a state heritage corridor being considered for the river. If it goes through, the land values increase." Henry turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Heritage corridor been talked about for 15 years, he said. "Every 5 years somebody in the state capital remembers the Taloa exists and proposes some kind of designation. Never goes anywhere." "His lawyers don't need it to go anywhere," I said. "They just need the conversation to exist. That's enough to file a motion." Henry nodded slowly. He had the understanding look of a man who had watched people be treated unfairly before, and knew that expressions of outrage were less useful than clear thinking. "You need a lawyer," he said. "I know. I don't know any lawyers down here. I've been here 3 weeks. Henry looked at Lydia. Lydia looked at the water. "There's a woman," Henry said. "Retired. Lives out on Piney Fork Road, about 6 miles south. Name is Delphine Arsenault. Practiced environmental and property law out of Savannah for 30 years. Moved back to the county after her husband died." He paused. "Celestine was her people. When Delphine's son was 12 years old, he needed a hospital in Savannah, and Delphine needed to stay close to him for 2 months. Celestine organized a rotation of river families to run the Arsenault family's small farm every other day, so the livestock didn't suffer. Never told anyone she'd arranged it. Delphine found out 6 months later through the church grapevine." I looked at him. "She came to the shop and told Celestine she owed her a debt she could never repay. Celestine told her that was fine, because Celestine wasn't running a tab." Henry stood and picked up his hammer again. "I'd say now is a good time to let Delphine know the debt is being collected." He called her that afternoon while I was behind the counter. Lydia drove out to Piney Fork Road to tell her in person, because Lydia had grown up 3 houses from the Arsenault place, and Delphine had been teaching her to identify fish species since she was 4 years old. Delphine Arsenault arrived the next morning in a gray pickup truck, carrying a leather briefcase that had been to enough courtrooms to have opinions about them. She was 68 years old, small and precise, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of settled authority that does not announce itself and does not need to. She shook my hand on the porch. "You look like Celestine," she said. "People keep saying that, because it's true." She sat in the chair beside me and accepted the coffee I offered without complaint, which told me immediately she was a person of character. "Tell me what happened, from the beginning." I told her everything. The divorce, the settlement, the assessment of the property at $11,000, Marcus's attorneys letting me keep it without contest, and now the motion to reopen. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The motion is going to fail," she said. "You're sure?" "For a settlement to be reopened on grounds of undervaluation, the challenging party has to demonstrate either that the valuation was deliberately fraudulent, or that conditions have materially changed in a way that creates inequity." She set her coffee down. "Was the valuation fraudulent?" "No. His own lawyers did the assessment. They called it a teardown. So they assessed it and dismissed it. That is their assessment, their error, their problem." She folded her hands. "Has the property materially changed in value since the divorce?" "Not that I know of. The heritage corridor thing is speculative at best." "Then there is no grounds for reopening." She looked at me steadily. "But I want to see the original deed and the chain of title." "Do you have them?" "My grandmother kept everything." Celestine's records, which I had by now organized into a careful system in the filing cabinet behind the counter, proved to be exactly as thorough as everything else Celestine had done. The deed went back to 1947. The property had passed from Celestine's parents to Celestine and from Celestine to me. It had never been jointly held. Marcus had never paid $1 of property tax on it. He had never set foot on it until he drove 4 hours to sit in Greer's office and file a motion. Delphine sat on a milk crate in the shop's back room and went through the documents with the focused efficiency of someone who has read thousands of documents and knows immediately what matters and what does not. When she was finished, she stacked the papers neatly on the workbench and looked up at me. "This is clean," she said. "Cleaner than most. The property was never marital. It was never commingled. His lawyers assessed it, dismissed it, and allowed it to be awarded to you without contest. They cannot now argue that they were deceived when they are the ones who did the deceiving of themselves." She stood and picked up her briefcase. "I'll file a response to the motion this week. The matter will be dismissed." She looked at me. "He is hoping you fold. He is hoping that the cost and complication of fighting the motion makes it easier for you to settle. That is the strategy. I know the strategy. I've watched it work on other people for 30 years. Delphine looked at me with the particular recognition that passes between women who understand certain things from the inside. "Not this time," she said. She left her card on the counter and drove away, and I stood on the porch and watched the gray truck disappear down the river road. Henry was on the dock, driving nails into new boards. Lydia was in the boat shed, and the sound of an engine running clean was coming through the open door, which was the sound of something working that had not worked before, which was also the only sound I wanted to hear. That evening, my daughter Simone called. She was 29 years old and lived in Chicago, where she worked in nonprofit development, which was a kind of work that Celestine would have understood and approved of, the quiet, efficient business of making sure good things could keep happening. She had her father's organizational mind and my tendency to read everything in a room before speaking. She had been careful during the divorce, careful with both of us, which was fair and also lonely in the way that being careful always is. "Mom," she said, "I heard about the motion. Your father told you." "He told me his side." "That's honest of you to say." A pause. Simone was a careful pauser. "Are you okay? What's it like down there? I still can't picture you at a bait shop." "Come and look." "Mom, I mean it. Come and see it before you make up your mind about it." Another pause. "Dad says you're being stubborn, that you're holding on to the property out of spite." I let that sit for a moment. I thought about what Celestine would have said, which was probably nothing, and what I was going to say, which was as close to nothing as I could manage. "Simone, I need to ask you something, not about your father, about yourself." "Okay. Do you know what your great-grandmother Celestine spent 40 years doing in that bait shop?" A pause of a different kind. "She ran the shop, sold bait, had the boats. That's what you could see. Do you want to know the rest?" I told her about the ledger, about the tin box, about the $47,000, saved dollar by dollar while Celestine was giving away everything she could spare, about the letters, about Gracie who kept her house and Hector who built his business, and the girl who went back to school because of a box of supplies on a porch at 6 a.m. Simone was quiet for a long time after I finished. "I didn't know any of that," she said. "I didn't either. I had to come back to find out." "Why didn't she tell you?" "Because she wanted me to find it when I needed it. She knew I was living somewhere very loud. She left a note in the tin box. She said I'd been in a loud place for a long time, and I'd forgotten what quiet sounds like." The line was quiet. "Was she right?" Simone asked. "Yes," I said. "She was completely right." Another long pause. "Mom, I want to come." "Then come. I have 2 weeks of leave I haven't used. My boss has been telling me to take it since February." "The dock is being fixed," I said, "and Lydia got one of the Evinrudes running today. I'll save you the first boat ride." Simone arrived on a Friday in a rental car she had not driven in 3 years, white-knuckling the river road because it was narrower than anything Chicago had prepared her for. She got out of the car and stood in the gravel lot and looked at the shop and the dock and the river beyond, and her face did the thing that faces do when a place is more than they were expecting. Lydia was at the dock, cleaning the hull of one of the aluminum boats. Vera had stopped in mid-morning and was sitting in her usual chair with a cup of coffee and an opinion about the color I should paint the front door. Simone walked slowly to the porch and stood taking it all in. "It's real," she said. "Were you expecting it not to be?" I asked. She looked at me. "I think I was expecting something sad, something that needed rescuing. It did need rescuing. It's being rescued. She walked the property the way I had walked it on the first morning, slowly and carefully, reading it the way I had taught her to read difficult texts, looking for what was actually there, rather than what she expected to find. She stood at the end of the dock for a long time, looking south down the river. Lydia came to stand beside her, and they talked in low voices about the river, the fish, the families, the history of the place. By the afternoon they were both on their knees on the dock, replacing a board that Henry's inspection had flagged, working side by side, with a comfortable efficiency that seemed to spring up from nowhere. That evening Simone sat beside me on the porch, after everyone else had gone. "I sided with Dad," she said, "during the divorce. I know. I thought you were being passive, not fighting for enough, not representing yourself clearly. I wasn't then. I've been learning." She turned her mug in her hands. "He called me last week. He sounded different, not the way he usually sounds when he's explaining things, more like the way he sounds when he's not sure he's right." "What did he say?" He asked what I thought the shop was worth. "What did you say?" I told him I hadn't been there yet. She paused. "But I'm here now." She looked out at the dark river. "And I don't think he knows how to measure what this is worth." I don't think the units exist for him. They didn't exist for me either for a long time. What changed? I thought about Celestine's letter, about the ledger, about coming home to a place she had prepared without telling me she was preparing it. She did, I said. She changed everything. She just waited until I was ready to let her. Simone stayed for 12 days. She helped replace dock boards, learned to check fuel lines on an outboard motor, sat on the porch and listened to Vera's stories about the river families, read the ledger from beginning to end one afternoon, and came into the shop afterward with red eyes she did not try to explain. She drove me to the county clerk's office to file a document Delphine had requested. She drove me to the savings and loan to meet with Ms. Arsenault about the investment of a portion of the $47,000 into building repairs. She drove me to the hardware store twice and knew without asking exactly which things on the list were urgent and which could wait. On the last day before she left, she helped me hang a photograph that Vera had brought over that morning. A photograph she had found in a box in her attic of Celestine standing on the porch of the shop in what must have been the early 1980s. Young Celestine, not as young as I ever knew her, but younger, with her hair natural and full, standing in the doorway with her hand on the frame, squinting into the morning light, looking at the camera with the expression of someone who knows exactly where she is and exactly what she is doing there. I hung it beside the cash register, next to the coffee can of pens and the half-completed ledger entry. Simone stood beside me and looked at it. "She looks like you," Simone said. "People keep saying that. They're right." She hugged me at the car before she drove away, held on longer than she usually did, the way people hold on when they have understood something that changes the way they hold. "Call me after the hearing," she said. "I will. And Mom." She looked at me through the car window. "Don't fold." "I'm not going to fold." "I know." She smiled. "But I wanted to say it." The hearing was on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after Marcus's attorneys filed the motion. I drove to the county courthouse in the same Silverado I had driven out of Fulton County Courthouse 14 years worth of living ago, which was 3 weeks ago, and also a lifetime, which is the particular property of time when something important happens. It expands inside the memory to fill the space it deserves. Delphine met me on the courthouse steps in a navy suit and carried nothing but a slim folder, which was either alarming or very reassuring and turned out to be the second one. Marcus was inside with Greer. He was wearing the same kind of clothes he always wore in professional settings, well cut and expensive, and designed to communicate a certain version of competence. He did not look at me when I walked in. He had always done this in difficult moments, looked at something else while he arranged his expression. The hearing lasted 19 minutes. Delphine presented 3 documents: the original deed from 1947, Celestine's will, properly notarized and witnessed, a chain of title summary showing unbroken descent from Celestine's parents through Celestine to me, never once touching a joint marital account or a shared property interest. She said what she had told me she would say, that the property was separate before the marriage and separate at its dissolution, that Marcus's own attorneys had assessed it and dismissed it, that speculative future value was not grounds for reopening a settlement, and that the motion had no legal foundation. Greer said something about equitable distribution and potential future value, and the court's obligation to ensure fairness. The judge looked at him with the expression of someone who has heard this particular argument before, and has opinions about it. Motion denied. The settlement stands. This matter is closed. Outside on the courthouse steps, the October sun was warm and golden and completely indifferent to the last 19 minutes. I was walking to my truck when I heard footsteps behind me. Marcus. He was alone, Greer having gone back inside for something. He looked, I noticed, tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. The kind of tired that comes from carrying something you have been telling yourself is lighter than it is. When did you become a different person? He said. It was the same question, I imagined, that men like Marcus ask women like me when we stopped being who they had needed us to be. I'm not a different person, I said. I'm the same person you married. You just didn't look closely enough to see who that was. I got in the truck and drove south. Home. The word was there again, unhesitating. I want to tell you what November looked like on the Tallulah River. I want you to see it. The water goes darker in November, the color of strong coffee, and the cypress trees along the bank show their color, soft amber and rust, the needles catching the low light and holding it. Great blue herons work the shallows from sunup to sundown. Wood ducks come through in groups, quick and iridescent, banking around the river bends with a precision that makes you understand, once and for all, that grace is not the opposite of efficiency. It is efficiency performed at the highest possible level. The bait shop was alive. Lydia had gotten all 3 motors running by the middle of October, clean, reliable, properly tuned. She had repainted the bottoms of the boats, and replaced the seat cushions, and fixed the navigation lights, and organized the storage shed at the end of the dock into a model of small space efficiency that Henry said looked like something from a marine manual. The boat rentals had started slowly and grown steadily. Fishermen came first, the regulars who had come to Celestine's for years, and had found the shop closed, and had been going farther afield to rent boats, and had not been happy about it. Then birders, who came for the herons and the wood ducks, and the occasional bald eagle, that worked the lower stretches of the river. Then families on weekends, kids in life vests, parents learning that the river moved slowly enough, and the boats were stable enough, and the whole experience was different from what any of them had expected. I had restocked the bait tanks, fresh shiners, crawdads, night crawlers. I had restocked the tackle wall behind the counter, replacing what was beyond use, keeping what was still good. The mechanical cash register, which turned out to work perfectly, had been joined by a card reader, because the world had changed since Celestine bought the register, but the register stayed, because some things should stay. The coffee pot never went off before 7 in the evening. Lydia had moved into the apartment above the shop, the one that had been mine during the years I lived with Celestine. The room that looked out over the river. She had done this without much ceremony, appearing one morning with a duffel bag and a question about whether the arrangement was still available, and it was. And we had both understood without discussing it that this was the right configuration of things. She paid what rent she could. I did not press for more. She enrolled in a marine mechanics certification program offered through the technical college in the county seat. She studied at the counter on slow afternoons, textbook open beside the cash register, making notes in the same small, precise handwriting she used for her motor diagnosis lists. I watched her one afternoon explaining to a nervous teenage boy how to check the fuel line on the outboard before taking the boat out. Patient, specific, showing him twice, and then letting him do it himself. She was Celestine. Or she was becoming it. Or maybe the thing that Celestine had been was not a specific person, but a practice, a way of being present and useful and honest about what you knew and did not know. And that practice could live in anyone who chose it. Henry came most mornings, not always with materials, sometimes just with his coffee and his opinions about the weather and the water and the river families, which were interchangeable in the Tallulah Valley. He had become the unofficial historian of the shop, the person customers talked to on the porch when they wanted to remember Celestine, and he talked about her with the same unhurried accuracy he brought to everything, without sentimentality and without diminishment, just the plain truth of who she had been. Vera brought food on a schedule that seemed random, but I suspected was not. Red beans on Mondays, cornbread on Wednesdays. On Fridays, whatever she had made too much of, which was always the right thing. And the neighbors kept coming, the valley people, the river families, the ones whose names appeared in Celestine's ledger across 4 decades. They came to buy bait and drink coffee and sit on the porch. They came to check on the shop, the way you check on something that belongs to you, which in a sense it did. I learned to read the ledger's entries in their faces. I recognized Gracie's daughter, who had Gracie's eyes, and the particular way of standing in a doorway assessing a room before entering it. the stance of someone who grew up needing to know exits. I recognized Hector's son, who had his father's hands and the same quality of attention when something mechanical was being explained. I recognized the children of families Celestine had helped, in the shapes of their faces, and the ease with which they walked into the shop, as if it were a place they had always been welcome. Because it had always been, for all of their lives. One morning, a man came in I didn't recognize. He was perhaps 40, from outside the county by the look of his clothes and the rental car in the lot. He wanted information about the Heritage Corridor designation, the state project that Marcus's lawyers had used as the basis of their motion. He worked for the State Environmental Agency. He was doing a preliminary survey of properties along the river corridor. I made him coffee and answered his questions. He asked about the history of the shop, the ownership, the property boundaries. I told him. He stood at the end for a long time, looking south. Before he left, he said, "This is exactly the kind of property the designation is meant to protect. Active, family-owned, historically continuous, river-dependent. If the corridor goes through, you would be eligible for a historic stewardship grant, significant funds, for preservation and improvement." He left a card. I set it on the counter beside Celestine's reading glasses and the coffee can of pens. I did not call anyone to share the news. I did not calculate what the grant might mean for the property's assessed value. I put the card in the drawer under the counter and went back to what I had been doing, which was reading Celestine's ledger for what was probably the 6th time, finding new things in it each time, the way you find new things in any text you love. The shop's value was not in what the state might designate. It was not in what any assessor might write on a form. It was in what Henry had said about Earl, which was the same truth about Celestine, which was that a person who dies owing nothing and being owed by everyone is the richest person in any valley. That was the only math I was interested in. One last thing, and then I will let you go. In December, I found the 28th across. The crossword puzzle that had been open on the counter since the day I arrived, Celestine's last puzzle, half completed in her block-letter handwriting. I had left it exactly where she had left it, beside the coffee can and the reading glasses, because it felt wrong to close something she had not finished. I had looked at 28th across many times. The clue was, what home gives even after it's gone, 7 letters. I had tried answers, memory, legacy, each one was wrong by a letter or two. I had stopped trying after a while, and let it sit. On a December morning, the river misted and the wood ducks moving in the fog, with Henry on the porch, and Lydia in the boat shed, and Vera's cornbread warming on the propane burner upstairs. I looked at the puzzle again. 7 letters. What home gives even after it's gone. I picked up a pen from the coffee can. Celestine's pen. The one with the blue cap she always kept at the front of the can. I looked at the letters already in the grid. The ones she had filled in, before she stopped. Then I understood. I wrote it in her block letters, carefully, the same size and weight as all the letters she had made. Rootage. Rootage. The way something planted keeps giving structure to the soil, long after the plant itself is gone. The root system that holds everything in place. That was what she had been giving all those years. Not money, not repairs, not groceries. Root structure. I set the pen back in the coffee can, picked up her reading glasses, cleaned them with the hem of my shirt, set them back on the counter, looked out the window at the river. The Tallowa moved south the way it always had, dark and deliberate and unconcerned with clocks, carrying everything that came to it and giving back what it could in the forms available to it. I had been here 4 months. I was behind the counter of my grandmother's bait shop on a river road in southeast Georgia, with $312 in a lockbox that was now empty, and a savings account that was no longer empty, and a dock that was solid, and a set of motors that ran, and a daughter who had promised to come back in the spring, and a woman named Lydia who was studying for her certification at this very counter, and a man named Henry who would be on the porch by 7:30 with coffee and opinions, and the unhurried patience of someone who believes that things worked on properly will hold. The divorce had cost me 31 years, and a house in Decatur, and a lake cabin I had loved, and a version of myself I had agreed to be for longer than was good for either of us. What it had given me was this: a river, a shop, a grandmother I was still learning to know, a community that had been waiting for someone to come back and turn the lights on, and the understanding, which I intended to spend the rest of my life acting on, that usefulness is its own form of wealth. The kind that does not appear on balance sheets, the kind that holds a valley together, the kind that outlasts every person who practices it, and passes into the soil, and becomes rootage. I was 56 years old, and I was just getting started. If you made it here with me all the way to the end of this story, thank you, from the bottom of everything I have. If you felt something in Celestine's words, in Nora's journey, in the slow return of a woman to the life that was always waiting for her, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. And tell me, from which city are you watching? I want to see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can keep bringing these truthful stories to you, because there are so many more, and every single one of them is worth telling. Part 2. What the River Keeps. I want to tell you about the morning the second letter arrived. Not from Marcus's attorneys this time, not from Greer and his charcoal suit and his billable hours. This letter came in a plain white envelope with a Tallowa County postmark, handwritten address, no return name. It was sitting in the small metal mailbox beside the shop door when I came downstairs at 6 in the morning, and I almost did not open it immediately because I had trained myself over the previous weeks to treat unexpected envelopes with the specific caution of a woman who had been ambushed by paperwork before. But the handwriting was not legal handwriting. It was the handwriting of someone old, careful, the letters formed with the deliberate attention of a person for whom writing by hand is still an act that deserves respect. I opened it at the counter with my first cup of coffee. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook, and on it were 4 paragraphs written in that same careful hand. Dear Nora Thibodeau, you do not know me. My name is Adeline Prater. I am 73 years old and I have lived on Piney Fork Road my entire life, except for 4 years I spent in Savannah, after high school, which I do not count, because Savannah did not want me and I did not want it. I knew your grandmother Celestine for 50 years. I was in the shop the morning she passed, or near enough to it. I had brought her coffee because hers was always terrible and she knew it, and we had argued about it for 30 years, and the arguing was a form of love we had both agreed to without naming it. I have something that belongs to you, or belongs to this place, which is the same thing. I would like to bring it to you if you are willing. I am available most mornings. I do not drive after noon because the light starts going strange on me, and I have enough sense to know my limitations, which is more than can be said for most people half my age. Please call, or simply expect me. I will come when I can. Adeline Prater. Below her name, a phone number written in the careful way of someone who understands that numbers need to be legible. I set the letter down and looked at the river. Lydia was already on the dock, doing the morning check of the boats before the first rental customers arrived. Henry's truck was not in the lot yet, which meant it was before 7:30. The shop was quiet with the good morning quiet, full of coffee smell and the low sound of the river. I called Adeline Prater. She answered on the second ring. I was hoping you'd call this morning, she said. Her voice was steady and unhurried, the voice of someone who has had the same relationship with time for 73 years and has stopped arguing with it. I'll be there by 9. Don't make coffee. I'm bringing mine. She arrived at 5 minutes to 9, in a truck that was older than mine, but better maintained. A deep burgundy Ford that moved with the quiet authority of something that had been properly cared for. She climbed out with a thermos in one hand and a paper bag in the other, and a canvas tote over her shoulder. She was a small woman, shorter than she seemed on the phone, with white hair cut close to her head, and the kind of face that had probably always looked exactly like itself, the kind that does not perform different versions depending on the company. Brown skin, deep-lined, beautiful in the way of things that have been thoroughly used. She walked to the porch without hurrying, and sat in the chair that had become, by something like unanimous unspoken agreement, Vera's chair. And she poured coffee from her thermos into 2 cups she produced from the paper bag, and she looked at the river, and then at me. You look like Celestine, she said. I've heard that. It's not a simple compliment. It means you carry yourself the way she did, like you know where the floor is even in the dark. She handed me a cup. Celestine walked like a woman who had measured every room she'd ever been in, and knew exactly where the exits were. That's not a nervous quality. That's a quality of competence. There's a difference. I drank her coffee. It was extraordinary. I told her so. I know, she said simply. Now, I have 2 things for you. She opened the canvas tote and produced a wooden box, the kind that might have held stationery or a deck of cards, latched with a small brass hook. She set it on the porch railing between us. "I have kept this for 14 years, she said, "since the week after Celestine's funeral. She gave it to me 6 months before she died and told me to give it to you when you came back. She said if you never came back, I should open it myself and do whatever seemed right. She trusted my judgment." "What's inside?" "I don't know." That was the instruction. She looked at the box. "Whatever is in there is between you and her." I unlatched the box. Inside, nested in a piece of old velvet that had been cut to size, was a compass. Brass, old, the kind that had been made to last, with a glass cover over the face, and a worn ring where a chain had once been attached. The needle moved when I tilted it, finding north with the calm certainty of something that has always known exactly where it is pointed. Below the compass, folded into a square, was a piece of paper. I unfolded it. Celestine's handwriting. A single paragraph. "Nora, this was your grandfather Remy's compass. He used it on the river for 40 years. He said a compass does not tell you where to go. It tells you where you are. Those are different things, and most people confuse them their whole lives. I think you know the difference now. If you don't yet, you will. Keep this behind the counter. It belongs in the shop." I closed my hand around the compass. The needle steadied. Adeline watched me with the expression of someone who has delivered something important and is giving it time to land. "The second thing," she said after a moment. She reached into the canvas tote again and produced a folder. Manila, slightly worn, with a label on the tab in handwriting I did not recognize. "This is from my cousin's daughter," Adeline said. "She is a hydrologist with the State Environmental Agency. She has been working on the Taloa River Corridor assessment for 3 years. She is not supposed to share preliminary findings, but she is also my cousin's daughter, which means she knows what family obligation is worth." Adeline set the folder on the railing. "What is in that folder is not official. It is not dated. It has no names on it, and I did not give it to you. What you choose to do with the information is your business." I looked at the folder. "Your ex-husband's lawyers based their motion on the speculation that the corridor designation would increase property values," Adeline said. "They were correct about the designation. The corridor is going through. The state announcement will be in approximately 60 days. She folded her hands in her lap. "What they were incorrect about is the nature of the impact on this specific property." I opened the folder. The document inside was a preliminary assessment of properties along the proposed heritage corridor. Most properties would see increased assessed values as a result of the designation. Some would see significant increases. But properties that qualified as active heritage operations, meaning properties with documented continuous family ownership and active community-dependent use, were eligible for a different classification entirely. A protected heritage stewardship designation that came with specific legal protections. Under a protected heritage stewardship designation, the property could not be subject to forced sale, could not be divided in a legal proceeding without the explicit consent of the designated steward, and was eligible for grant funding for preservation and operation. The motion that Marcus's attorneys had filed was, under this classification, not just legally unfounded, but actively precluded. A court could not order the division or sale of a protected heritage stewardship property, not for divorce settlement purposes, not for any civil claim. The application for the designation required documentation of continuous family ownership, evidence of active community use, and a statement of stewardship intent. I had all of it. I had decades of it. In Celestine's ledger, in her filing cabinet, in the letters from the River families, in the original deed going back to 1947. I set the folder on the railing and looked at the river. "Celestine would have known this was coming," Adeline said. "She knew the river, and she knew the county, and she had been reading the state agency newsletters for 20 years. She always said the corridor designation would happen eventually. She thought it would happen after she was gone." "Did she tell you that?" "She told me a great deal of things over 50 years of very bad coffee." Adeline almost smiled. "She said she wanted to make sure whoever came after her had what they needed to hold this place. She was not going to let some developer buy it, or some government program absorb it, or some legal proceeding carve it up." She looked at me. She left you the records, the documents, the savings, the property itself. She spent 40 years making this place worth protecting, and then she made sure the protection was possible. She did all of it on purpose, I said. Celestine never did anything except on purpose. I held Remy's compass in my palm, and felt the needle's quiet insistence on north, and I thought about a woman who had spent 60 years on a river road, making things that would last, and I understood for the first time completely that I had not inherited a bait shop. I had inherited a plan. Delphine Arsenault came the following afternoon. I called her after Adeline left, told her about the Heritage Corridor designation and the stewardship classification, and the folder from Adeline's cousin's daughter, whose name I did not know and did not need to know. Delphine arrived with her briefcase and her reading glasses, and the settled authority she carried, the way Celestine had carried her knowledge of the river, not displayed but always present. She sat at the counter and read the document from the folder. She read it twice, in the way she read everything, the second time slower than the first. Then she set it down, and looked at me. "Apply immediately," she said. "Do not wait for the official announcement. Get the application in first. Before the designation is public, before the attention comes, before anyone has a chance to contest it or complicate it." Can I apply before the announcement? The stewardship program has been accepting applications for 2 years. The announcement is about the corridor designation, which triggers increased interest, but the program itself is open now. She put on her glasses and pulled a notepad from her briefcase. "I will help you with the application. You have everything you need already. Celestine's records are better documentation than most historic preservation applications I have seen from properties that had professional archivists." We spent 2 hours at the counter, working through the application, property history, ownership chain, community use documentation, stewardship intent statement. For the community use section, we used entries from Celestine's ledger, the thank you letters, the records from the filing cabinet in the boat shed. 50 years of evidence that this place had been exactly what it claimed to be, an active community resource, continuously operated, deeply embedded in the life of the Taloa River Valley. For the stewardship intent statement, Delphine asked me to write it myself, in my own words. I sat at the counter that evening after she had gone, and Lydia was upstairs, and Henry had taken his truck home, and the river was going dark, and the first stars were appearing above the cypress line. And I wrote it in longhand on a piece of yellow legal paper, because that was what was in reach. This shop has operated as a community resource on the Taloa River for more than 60 years. In that time it has served the fishing and boating community, the families of the valley, and the river itself, by providing a continuous, accessible point of presence on this water. The previous steward, Celestine Josephine Thibodeau, understood this shop not as a commercial enterprise, but as a form of community infrastructure, one of those unremarked but essential points in a community's fabric that holds other things in place. Her records, which are extensive and preserved, document a life of service to this valley that was conducted without announcement and without expectation of recognition. I intend to continue what she built, not as a monument to what it was, but as a living continuation of what it has always been. A place where the door is open, the coffee is on, and someone behind the counter knows your name and will not look away when you are struggling. I write this as Celestine's granddaughter, and as a woman who has come home at 56 and found the home better than she deserved and more than she expected. I intend to be worthy of it. I signed it Nora Celestine Thibodeau, and I folded it into the application folder, and I set it on the counter beside the brass compass, and Celestine's reading glasses, and the coffee can of pens. Delphine filed the application the following Thursday. 3 weeks later, the Heritage Stewardship designation was approved. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, official state letterhead, signed by the Director of the Cultural and Natural Heritage Division. Celestine's Bait and Tackle, Taloa River, Taloa County, was formally designated a Georgia Heritage River Stewardship Site. The designation carried legal protection against involuntary sale or division, eligibility for preservation grants, and recognition as part of the official Heritage Corridor. Marcus's motion, which Delphine had already gotten dismissed on property law grounds, became additionally and permanently moot. A protected heritage stewardship site was not an asset available for division in any civil proceeding. It was protected by state statute. I called Delphine when the letter arrived. "I know," she said. "They called me this morning. Congratulations." What do I owe you? I asked. She was quiet for a moment, the same pause she had given me the first time I asked. Your grandmother organized a rotation of river families to run my farm for 2 months when my son was in the hospital. She did it without being asked, without telling me until it was already arranged, and without accepting a word of thanks when I tried to give her one. Another pause. I practiced law for 30 years. I have never done anything that repaid that. Consider this a continuation of the attempt. She hung up before I could respond. I sat at the counter for a long time after that, holding the designation letter, listening to the river. I need to pause here and speak to you directly, because what I am about to tell you is the part of this story that matters most, and I want you to be present for it. Everything I have described, the shop, the ledger, the $47,000, the designation, the dismissal of Marcus's motion, all of it arrived because one woman decided, 60 years ago, to build something for someone who had not been born yet. Celestine did not know me when she started keeping the ledger. She did not know what my life would become, or what I would need, or what year I would finally drive south and turn off Route 7 and sit in the parking lot of her shop, not sure I was ready to go inside. She built it anyway. She built it for the person she believed I was underneath whatever I had agreed to become. She built it because she loved me, and because love, the serious kind, the kind that is not about the lover's comfort, thinks ahead. This is what I want you to carry from this story. Not the legal victory, not the heritage designation, or the $47,000, or the dismissed motion. Those are the visible parts. The part underneath, the rootage, is this. Someone in your life has probably built something for you that you do not yet know about. Some preparation, some provision, some arrangement made in love that you will not find until you are ready to find it. And if no one has done that for you, then you are now the person who can do it for someone else. That is the whole lesson of the Taloa River. You can keep it in your pocket. It is not heavy. If you feel these words, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to this channel. And I really want to know, from which city are you watching? I want to see how far a woman's voice can reach when she is telling the truth about something that matters. Help me build this community. Let's bring more stories like this one, real ones, true ones, the kind that hold something in place the way rootage holds the soil. Leave your city in the comments. I am listening. The week after the designation letter arrived, Jessie came back. Not Jessie from some other story. My Jessie. Which is to say, not my Jessie at all, not yet. But the person who would turn out to matter in a way I could not have predicted. On the afternoon, a white pickup truck limped into my lot with a bad water pump, and a driver who did not know what to say when someone offered help without conditions. His name was not Jesse. His name was Callum Broussard. He was 27 years old. He drove a truck that had more miles on it than years he had been alive. And he arrived not with a mechanical problem, but with a question. He had grown up in Taloa County, left at 18 for work in the construction industry, spent 9 years moving from site to site around the southeast, living in temporary housing, never staying anywhere long enough to unpack properly. He had come back to Taloa County 3 months before because his grandmother, who was the last person he felt tethered to in the world, had fallen ill. He had been staying with her, helping her manage, and he had heard that Celestine's shop had reopened. He came to ask about work, not in the way of someone who expects to be hired, in the way of someone who has been turned down enough times to have pre-accepted the refusal while still making the attempt. He stood on the porch with his hands at his sides and told me he had 9 years of construction experience, that he was good with tools and structures and the kind of physical problem-solving that old buildings presented, and that he was available and would work for whatever was fair, and understood that fair might be very little at first. I looked at him the way Celestine must have looked at people who came to her with genuine need and genuine offer. Then I looked at the south corner of the dock, which Sullivan had flagged as needing attention in a way that was beyond his expertise, requiring someone with structural construction knowledge. Then I looked at the boat shed, which needed a new roofline. Then I looked at the main building, which had 3 items on the deferred maintenance list that I had deferred because I did not yet have either the money or the expertise. Can you read a structural problem from looking at it? I asked. Yes. Can you fix what you diagnose? Usually. Do you have tools? In the truck. I looked at him for another moment. He did not look away. He was not performing confidence. He was simply present. "Coffee's on," I said. "Come in and tell me about your grandmother." His grandmother was Hattie Broussard, 81 years old, who had lived in the same house on the River Road for 53 years. When Callum told me her name, I knew it immediately from Celestine's ledger. Hattie Broussard, December 1978. Her husband passed last month. She has a boy and a girl, both young. I have been stopping by on Tuesday mornings with groceries. She does not ask where they come from. I do not say. She is too proud and too sad and too tired for either of us to make it complicated right now. I will keep stopping until she gets her footing. And then, months later, Hattie is managing. She found work at the school kitchen. The boy is in Little League. The girl is reading everything she can find. I brought a box of books from the church sale, left it on the porch on a Saturday morning. Hattie called me 2 days later to thank me. I said I didn't know anything about any books. She laughed. It was good to hear. I set Callum's coffee on the counter and watched him drink it, and I thought about the long invisible thread that ran from December 1978, through all the years between, through Hattie raising her children, and her children growing, and Callum being born, and spending summers on this river road, all the way to this morning on my porch. Celestine had kept Hattie's footing in 1978. Hattie's footing had made Callum possible. And Callum, who did not know any of this, was sitting at my counter, asking if I needed someone who was good with structures. I told him about the ledger that evening, after he had spent the afternoon assessing the dock corner and the boat shed roofline, and the 3 deferred items on the main building list, and had produced from a small notebook a prioritized repair plan with material estimates that were more accurate than anything I had put together on my own. He read the entry about his grandmother without moving. His eyes went through the paragraph twice. Then he closed the ledger gently, the way you close something that deserves respect, and set it on the counter. "She talked about someone helping her through that year," he said. "When I was growing up," said, "she thought it was the Lord. And then she thought maybe the Lord had a helper. And she never found out who the helper was." He looked at Celestine's photograph on the wall. "She knew," I said. "She suspected. But she let your grandmother have her story about it, because that was more important than being credited." Callum nodded. He looked at the tools on the pegboard, outlined in their red markers. He looked at the compass behind the register. Rennie's compass, needles steady on north. "Can I start on the dock corner tomorrow morning?" he said. "I'll have coffee on at 6:30, I said. He was there at 6. Hattie Broussard came to the shop, on the first warm day, in late November. Callum drove her, slowly and carefully, in his truck, and helped her up the porch steps, with a hand that was practiced at this particular assistance. She was small, and moved carefully, but her eyes were the eyes of a woman who had always been paying attention, and had not stopped. She sat in the porch chair, and Callum went to look at something in the boat shed, and I brought coffee and sat beside her, and we looked at the river. "I knew Celestine for years," Hattie said. "We weren't close the way some women are close. But we had a friendship, the kind that is made of small, consistent things over time. Better than the big dramatic kind, if you ask me, more reliable. Tell me about her." Hattie turned her cup in her hands. The river moved in front of us, steady and dark. "When Bernard died," she said, using her husband's name, with the particular directness of someone who has decided to speak of their grief, without managing it, "I had 2 children, and no plan, and the kind of pride that comes from never having needed to ask for help before. It is the worst kind of pride because it wears the face of independence, but it is really just fear dressed up nice." She paused. "Someone left groceries, every Tuesday, for months, the same things every time, things I needed, things I was too proud to buy from the food bank because everyone in that line would know me, just left on the step. No note." She looked at the river. "I told myself for years it was a coincidence, that someone had the wrong porch, that it would stop. It never stopped until I was back on my feet." She looked at the photograph of Celestine through the shop window. "I knew eventually. The way you know things you already knew." She wrote it down, I said, every Tuesday in her ledger. Hattie was quiet. "Every week," I said, "for as long as you needed it." She noted the day you got the school kitchen job. She noted when your daughter started reading everything she could find. Hattie's eyes filled. She did not wipe them immediately. Let the moment be what it was. "That girl," she said softly, "that stubborn, quiet, generous girl. We sat in silence for a while. The river moved. A wood duck appeared and disappeared around the bend. "How is Callum working out?" Hattie asked eventually, in the tone of a woman who is asking more than the literal question. "He is extraordinary," I said honestly. "He sees what a building needs the way Celestine saw what a person needed. He just looks and he knows." Hattie nodded. "He got that from his grandfather. Bernard could look at a structure and tell you its history. He used to say that buildings are honest in a way that people cannot afford to be. They show their damage. Callum is the same way. He needs this," she said. "Not just the work, the place. He has been traveling for 9 years without anywhere to put down." She looked at me. "He needs the kind of work that has a meaning past the paycheck." "He has it here," I said. She looked at me for a moment with the assessing gaze of a woman who has earned her assessments. "You're keeping it," she said. "I'm keeping it." She nodded once, the nod of someone who has had a question answered that they have been carrying for a while. "Celestine would be satisfied," she said. "That's the highest thing I can say." Simone came back in February as she had promised. She arrived this time without the white-knuckle grip on the river road, having practiced it twice in her imagination over the intervening months, according to her own account. She brought her 9-year-old son, Theo, who was the first great-grandchild of Celestine's line to set foot on the Taloa River property, and who walked off the rental car and immediately wanted to know why the water was that color. "Tannins," I told him, "from the roots and leaves. The river is full of old trees." "So it's like tree tea," he said. "Exactly like that." He thought about this for a moment. "Can you fish in it?" "That is almost entirely what you can do in it." He looked at the dock. "Can we go now?" Lydia took him out in the smallest aluminum boat that afternoon, just the two of them, with a rod and a tackle box, and Lydia's patient instruction on how to read the water for likely fish locations. He came back 2 hours later with one small base, and the expression of a person who has been changed by an experience, and is still figuring out how. He told me about the fish in the extended detail that children reserve for things they love, and I listened to all of it. That evening, while Theo slept on the couch upstairs, Simone and I sat on the porch, with the river going dark in front of us. "He's going to want to come back," Simone said. "Good. He's going to ask for every school break. There is a boat with his name on it." Simone smiled. She had been smiling more this visit, not the careful performed smile of someone managing a complicated situation, but the smile of someone who has put something down and found their face changed by the absence of the weight. "I talked to Dad," she said. I waited. He asked about the shop, not about the property value or the legal situation, just about what it was like, what I thought of it. She turned her cup. I told him it was the most real place I had ever been, that it was small and old and not impressive by any definition he would use, but that it held something that nothing he had built in 30 years of real estate development held. What did he say? He was quiet for a long time, and then he said he thought he had taught me to measure the wrong things. A pause. I told him he hadn't taught me, that you had, and Celestine had. She looked at the river. He didn't argue. I thought about the man I had married at 25, the man who had taught me, over 30 years, to make myself smaller and quieter and more agreeable, not through cruelty, but through the accumulated weight of what he valued and what he dismissed. That was my portion of the responsibility, and I held it without excusing it, but also without flagellating myself for it, because Celestine's ledger had taught me something about that too. You help people where they are. You do not blame them for where they are. You give them what they need to get somewhere else, and you let them make the journey on their own time. I had been the person who needed the help. I had gotten where I needed to get. That was the whole story, in its simplest version. "He's not a bad man," I said. "I know." Simone looked at me. "You've said that before." "It keeps being true." "He just measured the wrong things." "His whole life," I said, "and he believed the measurements." We sat with that for a moment. The river accepted it the way it accepted everything, without judgment, just by continuing to move. "Are you happy, Mom?" Simone asked. The question landed simply, the way simple questions do when they are genuinely meant. I thought about it, not performing thought, actually thinking, running through the honest inventory of my days, waking to the river, the smell of coffee and the sound of Lydia downstairs, and Callum's truck in the lot at 6, and Henry on the porch by 7:30. The customers who came and stayed and talked, the families who came back, the the ones from Celestine's ledger, and the new ones, the ones who had never met Celestine, but could feel what she had built in the way you feel a good structure, not by examining it, but by being inside it, and noticing that it holds. The boat rentals and the bait tanks and the mechanical cash register and the compass on the counter and the photograph of Celestine in the doorway and the crossword puzzle with 28 across, finally filled in. The work that had meaning past the paycheck, the quiet that I had been too loud to hear for 30 years and now heard every single morning. Yes, I said, I am genuinely happy. Simone leaned her head briefly against my shoulder. It was the gesture of a much younger version of her, a girl I remembered from her childhood, easy and trusting, the gesture she had stopped making somewhere around the age of 12, when she learned that the adults in her house were performing a version of things that required everyone to maintain certain positions. She was leaning against my shoulder on the porch of Celestine's bait shop, and the river was moving in front of us, and everything that needed to be different was different now. I put my arm around her and we stayed that way until the stars were fully out above the cypress line. I want to tell you about March. The Heritage Corridor was officially announced by the state in the first week of March. The Tallowa River was named one of 7 protected natural and cultural heritage corridors in Georgia. The designation meant federal and state protection for the waterway and its adjacent properties, funding for conservation and cultural preservation, and the beginning of what the announcement described as a long-term investment in the communities of the river valley. The local paper ran the story on the front page. Below the fold, they ran a photograph of the shop, and below the photograph, they ran 3 paragraphs about the Heritage Stewardship designation and the shop's 60-year history of community service. They mentioned Celestine by name. She set it on the counter without comment, and poured herself coffee, and sat on the stool, and let me read it. When I finished, I set it down beside Celestine's photograph. She knew, Vera said. She always knew. 60 years on this river. She knew every proposal that went through the state assembly. She used to say the corridor would happen, but she wouldn't be here to see it. Vera sipped her coffee. I think she knew you would be. People came that week who had not come before. Families from further down the river road. People from the county seat who had read the paper. A journalist from Savannah who wanted to write about the shop's history and the heritage designation and sat at the counter for 3 hours with a notebook, asking about Celestine. I told her everything, about the ledger, about the tin box, about the letters in the filing cabinet, and the quiet, systematic generosity of a woman who had spent 60 years holding a valley together without mentioning it to anyone. The journalist was quiet for a moment after I finished. Why do you think she never talked about it? She asked. I thought about what Vera had said, about invisible work, about what Adeline had said, about generosity that announces itself, becoming generosity that is for the giver. Because the moment you start talking about helping people, I said, you have turned it into something about you. She didn't want it to be about her. She wanted it to be about them. The journalist wrote that down. The article ran the following Sunday. It described Celestine's Bait and Tackle as a living example of community infrastructure, one of those invisible essential nodes in a community's fabric that holds other things in place. It quoted Hattie Broussard and Henry Doucette and Adeline Prater. It quoted the ledger entries, with my permission, selecting 4 of them to illustrate the scope and the character of what Celestine had done. Delphine called me when it ran, said she had read it twice and was glad. Callan's grandmother called from her house on the river road and said she had read it aloud to her neighbor and that they had both cried, which she considered appropriate and not embarrassing. Simone called from Chicago and said Theo had asked to have it printed out and she had laminated it, and he had put it on the wall of his room next to his school art projects, which made me hold the phone against my chest for a moment before I could say anything. The letters began arriving the following week. Not official letters, personal letters, handwritten, from people across Tallowa County and beyond, people who had heard about the shop, read the article, remembered Celestine, people whose families had been helped by her, some of whom had not known, until the article, that what had helped them had come from the woman behind the counter on Route 7. A man from Savannah who was 53 years old, and who had been, as a 7-year-old, the little boy who held the flashlight in the boat shed while his mother waited for her car to be fixed. He said he had become an electrical engineer, and that he had never forgotten the particular thrill of being taken seriously enough to be given a real job to do, even if the job was holding a light. A woman who had grown up in the county and moved away at 18, and spent 30 years in Atlanta, which she said with the particular wry tone of someone who understood the irony of that detail, in the context of my story. Who said she had come home twice in those 30 years, and the shop being open had mattered to her in ways she had not fully articulated until she read the article. A family of 4 who had been on a camping trip along the river 5 years before Celestine died, and had stopped at the shop for bait, and ended up spending 2 hours on the porch, because Celestine had started asking the father about his work, and one thing had led to another. They said their children still talked about the afternoon at the bait shop on the river as one of their clearest memories of childhood. I answered every letter, by hand, at the counter, in the mornings before the day got busy. I wrote back to the electrical engineer, and the woman from Atlanta, and the camping family, and every other person who had sent something. I told them about the shop now, about Lydia, and Callum, and Henry, and Vera, and Adeline, about the boats running, and the bait tanks full, and the coffee never going off before 7 in the evening. I told them the door was open. Come back if you are ever on Route 7. Several of them did. On a Tuesday morning in late March, with the river beginning to show its spring behavior, moving faster than higher, with the rain from the mountains to the north, I was behind the counter reading through the last section of Celestine's ledger, the entries from her final years, when I heard a car I did not recognize turn into the lot. It was a modest sedan, clean, Georgia plates. A man got out who was perhaps 65, gray-haired, wearing the careful casual clothes of someone who had dressed with some intentionality for whatever this errand was. He stood beside his car, looking at the shop with an expression I recognized. The same expression I had seen on the faces of people who had grown up with this place as a landmark, and were seeing it open again for the first time. He came to the porch and stood at the door. "Is this Celestine's?" he said, as if checking, as if needing to verify that the thing he remembered was real. "It is," I said. "I'm her granddaughter, Nora." He stood in the doorway for a moment. He had the expression of someone carrying something that was about to change in weight. "My name is Arthur Prater," he said. "Adeline's brother." I knew the name from the ledger. Arthur Prater, 1985, helped with the seedling order for his nursery business, $25. He'll pay it back when he can. 1987, Arthur's nursery is doing well. He brought me a flat of tomato seedlings. I accepted them. Said it was good to see something planted grow. "Come in," I said. "I'll pour you a cup." He sat at the counter and wrapped both hands around the mug, the way people do when they need something to hold. "I heard about the ledger," he said. "Adeline told me." He looked at the wall, at Celestine's photograph. "I have been meaning to come for 3 months, and I kept not being ready." "Take your time," I said. "I went bankrupt in 1984, he said. "Lost my first business. A landscaping company I had spent 6 years building. Bad contracts, bad timing, good recession." He looked into his coffee. "I was 40 years old and I was starting over with nothing, and I had a wife and 2 daughters, and I was not willing to tell any of them how bad it was." I waited. "Someone paid my nursery's first order of seedling stock in the spring of 1985, he said. "Anonymous. The supplier said someone had come in and paid it in cash, and asked them not to say who. $25 was a lot to me then. It was the difference between starting over or not." He was quiet. "I built the nursery into something real," he said. "Ran it for 23 years, sent both my girls to college, retired 2 years ago." He looked at me. "I have been trying to find out who paid that bill for 38 years. I opened the ledger to the page, set it on the counter in front of him. He read the entry. His hands on the counter were very still. $25, he said. That was what she had. He pressed his lips together. His eyes were wet, but his voice stayed steady, the way voices stay steady when people have decided they are going to hold on. "I would have found another way," he said. "Maybe, but she didn't make me find another way. She just made it possible to start." "That was the thing she understood," I said. "The difference between surviving and being able to start. She gave people the ability to start." Arthur Prater sat at the counter for a long time. He drank his coffee, and I did not interrupt the quiet, and he looked at the photograph of Celestine, and the compass, and the ledger, and the half-finished crossword with its completed 28th across. Before he left, he said, "I want to do something. I have a retired nursery operation, greenhouse space, equipment, soil. I want to donate a full planting to the dock and the property, native plants, river species, things that belong here." Celestine always talked about restoring the native planting along the bank. "She did?" She used to say the bank needed its roots back, that the right plants hadn't been there since her father's time. He stood. Let me give her that. He came back the following week with a truck and his nephew and 36 native plants, river birch and swamp rose, and buttonbush and wild iris and water willow, and they planted them along the bank in the places Arthur said the water would benefit from the root structure, the places where erosion was taking the bank slowly, and the plants would hold it. Callum helped them work. Henry supervised from the dock, and occasionally pointed at things without being able to get down to the bank himself due to his knees. Lydia made coffee, and kept count of what was planted where, so we would have a record. I stood on the dock, and watched and held Remy's compass in my palm, the needle steady, pointing north. What home gives even after it's gone? The plants went into the Taloa riverbank in the late afternoon of a Tuesday, the native species returning to the ground where they belonged, and the river moved steadily past them, unconcerned and continuous, as it had always moved, as it would continue to move long after every one of us had finished what we were doing and given the river back to itself. Let me tell you how the days go now. I wake at 5:30, before the alarm. The apartment above the shop smells like river air and coffee and the faint cedar of old wood. And the window above my bed shows me the first light on the water before I am fully awake. I come downstairs at 6, start the coffee, open the front door, and stand on the porch for a few minutes before the day begins. The way Celestine stood on this porch for 60 years, watching the river say what it has always said, which is that it is larger than whatever is happening in your particular life, and also that your particular life is worth paying attention to. And these two things are not contradictions. Lydia is in the shop by 6:15, coming down from the apartment upstairs, quiet and efficient in the morning, her certification study guide already on the counter beside her coffee. She passed her first certification exam in February. The second is in May. She keeps the motors running and the boats ready, and the dock in better condition than it has been in years. And she does all of this with the same unhurried precision that I have come to understand is not a personality trait, but a practice. The same practice Celestine had, of doing each thing completely before moving to the next. Callum arrives at 6:30 in his truck, which runs better now because Lydia has had opinions about it. He works the structural things, the ongoing list that old buildings produce the way old trees produce leaves, continuously and seasonally. He also handles the heavier physical work of the marina itself, the dock maintenance, the boat lift, the storage. He has enrolled in a construction management course at the technical college. He studies at the counter beside Lydia on slow afternoons, their notebooks open, their silences companionable. He still goes to Hattie's every morning before he comes to the shop. He makes her coffee and checks her medication and sits with her for 30 minutes, which is not nothing for someone 27 years old with better uses for his morning. But Callum, I have learned, understands what obligation to people you love looks like, and he fulfills it without resentment because it comes from choice and not from guilt. Henry arrives when Henry arrives, which is usually between 7 and 8, and he brings opinions about the weather and the water level and the families of the valley, and he sits on the porch and talks to whoever is there, and the talking is as much a part of what the shop provides as the bait and the boats. Vera stops by when she has something to bring, which is most days. She and Henry have developed what I can only describe as a competitive friendship, a relationship structured around disagreement that is clearly and obviously a form of deep mutual regard. They argue about the weather, about local history, about the correct way to make cornbread, about whether the east bank or the west bank of the Taloa has better bass structure. They are never cruel and never boring, and the shop is better for both of them. The customers come, the river families, the regular fishermen, the occasional stranger off the highway who has somehow found their way to Route 7 and ends up sitting on the porch longer than they planned. They come for bait and gas and boat rentals and to get their motors looked at by a woman who knows what she is doing. And they stay for the porch and the coffee and the particular quality of a place where someone behind the counter knows their name. I run the counter and the books and the operation. I keep the ledger, not Celestine's, though hers is on the shelf behind me, but my own, the same kind of accounting book, green-ruled columns. My entries are different from hers in some ways, and the same in the ways that matter. I note the things that happen here, the small ones, the ones that do not make financial records or newspaper articles, the ones that are only visible if you are paying the right kind of attention. The teenager who came in for hooks, and ended up talking for 40 minutes about the college application essay she could not figure out how to write. I talked with her about what Celestine's ledger had taught me, about visible and invisible work. And she went home and wrote an essay about her grandmother's garden, and got into the school she was hoping for. She came back in March to tell me. The retired school teacher who stopped for gas on a Tuesday, and mentioned that he had been trying for 3 years to donate a collection of local history books to somewhere they would be read. And I cleared a shelf behind the counter and put them there. And now people pick them up while they are waiting, and sometimes they take one home and bring it back, and the collection has grown. The young father who rented a boat on a Saturday with his 7-year-old daughter, and came back an hour later not because anything was wrong, but because the daughter had caught her first fish and wanted to show me. I have shown up, I have paid attention, I have helped when I can, and kept my mouth shut about most of it, because Celestine was right, that helping that announces itself is helping that is really for the helper. This is what usefulness looks like from the inside. It does not feel heroic, it does not feel like anything except doing the next thing that needs doing, and then the thing after that, and then the thing after that. It is the accumulation of small, consistent choices. The Tuesday groceries, the seedling order, the anonymous surgery fund, the coffee that is always on, the door that is always open, the light that is always lit. I want to close this story the way I would close a letter to someone I love, not with a dramatic ending, because lives that are worth living do not end dramatically. They end the way the river moves, continuously, going where they are going, not stopping to perform their own significance. I am 56 years old. I came here with $211 and a cardboard box of things that fit into a truck bed, and a deed to a building that a man in a charcoal suit had assessed at $11,000 and dismissed as a rounding error on a balance sheet. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because I found what was here. What was here was a woman I had loved without fully knowing. What was here was 60 years of evidence that a life lived in service to others is not a small life. It is the largest life available. What was here was the proof, written in green accounting columns in Celestine's careful hand, that invisible work is not invisible at all. It is the most visible thing in the world, if you know how to read the world. You read it in the family that tipped its house, in the business that started because of $25, in the woman who went back to school, in the boy who grew up to be an electrical engineer because someone took him seriously enough to give him a flashlight to hold. Celestine held this valley for 60 years. She held it the way the native plants hold the riverbank, not by force, by presence, by putting down roots deep enough to matter. I am learning to do the same. The compass is behind the counter. The needle points north. The coffee is on. The door is open. Remy said a compass doesn't tell you where to go. It tells you where you are. I know exactly where I am. I am home. And I am just getting started. If you have been here with me through every part of this story, through every mile of Route 7, every page of Celestine's ledger, and every morning on that porch with the river moving in front of us, I want to say thank you, from the deepest part of what I am. Stories like this one exist because women like Celestine lived them quietly, and women like Nora found them and understood what they were for. I tell these stories because they deserve to be told, because the invisible work deserves to be seen, because a woman's voice, when it is telling the truth, can reach further than anyone expects. If you felt something here today, if something in this story held you the way rooted holds the soil, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. And tell me, from which city are you watching? Leave it in the comments below. I want to see how far this community reaches, how many women and how many hearts are listening from how many places. Help me build something here, the way Celestine built something on the Taloa River. One person, one city, one story at a time, because there are so many more stories to tell, and every single one of them is worth your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.